Right. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. So welcome to this webinar. We're a couple of minutes late, so apologies for that. I had a slight glitch, but it's also useful just to let one or two people who come a bit later. Can you now see the screen, Simon? Okay.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
So my name is Stuart. I'm one of the directors of IIM. I'll let Simon introduce himself. Do you want to do that now or when you come to your part?
No, I'll just wait until you've done the IIM
That's
piece.
fine.
Yeah.
So just briefly for everybody to introduce you. So the IIM is the Institute of Interim Management. It's actually 25 years old this year. It's run by interims for interims, as we like to call it. So we're all pro bono. We have a code of conduct. We have members who are accredited and go through an accreditation process to become members. And you can see on the screen some other comments there, which I shan't spend time on those. Just a little bit about what the IIM is about. So there's a whole load of things on the left-hand side and the right-hand side that help you in your space as an interim. Just to call out a couple of ones. So we have quite a program of webinars, events, which is growing. This is one of them. There's a WhatsApp community for members to interact on. And there are various subgroups within that for functions and regions and so on for people to join and interact. More recently, we have an assignment alerts tool, which should be useful to most interims. We obviously run, or maybe not obviously to some of you, we run a major annual survey, which is actually coming up in April, which is the largest, most independent of the interim management space that we're aware of. So again, a whole load of access tools on the right-hand side for you, which you would access as a member. As I said, we do independent accreditation. We do some lobbying as well, alongside other groups that are interested in protecting the interim space, and educate, showcase your profile on site when you join. Just calling out the subscription fee is £160 a year. There's an initial application fee, which if you've read already, there's two little red stars, and at the bottom, when you apply, if you apply this coupon code landing 100 at the payment stage, your 40 quid will get waived anywhere in the next 4 weeks. And I think that is basically it. So Simon, I will let you share and crack on.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. And my name is Simon Hudson, and I'm a director of a business called Morphosis Partners. We've been supporting the interests of interim professionals for many years now. And about 3 or 4 years ago, we came into contact with the Institute of Interim Management. And through discussions, it became relevant that what it is that we do has potential merit and value for interims in certain situations. So what today is about really is an opportunity for you to politely pick the brains of somebody who has spent a number of years supporting the interests of the interim professional, not so much in role on assignment, but the bit that happens in between. So the way by which someone looks to acquire an assignment opportunity. So this is meant to be interactive, and I welcome questions. It's an opportunity for you to share your thoughts, your feelings, your concerns perhaps, because many of them may well be shared by other participants on the webinar today. So do please feel free to add to chat or Q&A as Charles will direct. Because ultimately this is your time and I don't want to make an assumption here. But what I will share with you are 5 of the common areas that most interim professionals need to be minded of really as an opportunity for assignment acquisition success. And if any of those things resonate with you, then by all means, offer a question. So I'm just going to get the presentation ready and I'll share that with you. And if we can have a nod, at least from you, Charles, just to say that there is something now on screen that we can all see.
Yeah, we have it.
Okay, so welcome everybody. And as I say, this is really about What can an interim professional do that will enable them to stand out in either a flat assignment acquisition marketplace or a very buoyant one? And whatever the circumstance is, it's about being able to identify the right assignment at the right time. And once that's identified, to be able to compete successfully and ultimately to land that opportunity. So really what we're going to be talking about is that, rather than, what an interim is or isn't. So what I would encourage, and these are a couple of prompts here, are questions. The majority, I'm sure, would have agreed to attend today because there's a curiosity, a question, a conundrum. So do please volunteer those questions, because you're not likely to be the only one with that question. And there's some prompts for you. So just in terms of who are Morphosis partners, are we credible? What's our area of expertise? Where do we get involved? Where do we make an impact? It's sort of highlighted on the left-hand side there. These are sort of scenarios, I suppose, that a number of interims may find themselves present with. So, for example, previously I went from assignment to assignment, but for some reason this time my CV doesn't seem to be hitting the mark, or the recruiters that once called me, or the ISPs that once called me, seem to have gone quiet. Is it me? Is it the market? Where's the disconnect? And the challenge with that is that a lot of disconnects are often framed around either smoke and mirrors, i.e. platitudes. You've got a great CV. You just need to try for the next one. Okay, so how is that helpful to me in terms of feedback? So actually what we do as a business is we work with individuals to get under the skin of actually what is stopping that individual from achieving the interim career that they had intended. And at any given time, there's approximately between 40 and 60% of the interim population that are not on assignment. Some of that will clearly be as intended, but for others, it will not be intended. So we kind of work with those who perhaps have found themselves with that disconnect in terms of utilisation or underutilisation. But equally, we work with some interims on an ongoing basis, a continuum basis, so that they move from one opportunity to another in almost a seamless fashion, or at least one that they have greater control with. So if any of those symptoms on the left or triggers resonate, by all means offer that up as a question, and I can share with you the thoughts through the experiences that we've had supporting individuals with the same scenario or disconnect. Some of our clients are quite happy to tell others that we're not bad at what we do and that there's value in what we do. So there's a couple here that are signposted for your relevance. And again, the slide deck will be made available to people. But what I want to highlight here is simply the fact that what it is that we will advocate and what we will talk you through over the webinar are essentially the tools, methods, insights that ultimately we have deployed for the people that are being indicated and others on this table. And the key points here really to realise is that the second column of time looking is really the situation that interim was in before they came to us. You know, that individual, how long had they been trying to get that access to the right opportunity? And for whatever reason, it just didn't seem to land. What you will then see with time with Morphosis is essentially a translation of value, you know, the impact that we're able to make. And you'll see here that we've worked in different geographies with different professional functions and capabilities. So we're in that sense sector agnostic, functionally agnostic, but really what it's there to highlight is that what we do quite uniquely is that we work with executives in what we refer to as the live environment. So it's not anecdotal, it's not purely theoretical. It's actually working with them to get the job done, essentially. So when we consider the ecosystem that interims are in and what are they facing, we know that it's actually a pretty big population. And it may or may not be a surprise that interim as a term for somebody to express their job title has proliferated over the last 5 or 6 years, you know, as the notion of interim has become more common. Similarly, in the last 2 to 3 years in particular, the term fractional has really accelerated. So the number of people, for example, on LinkedIn who are using the same notation is actually far higher. And that presents problems with ISPs because they now have, at face value, a far stronger pot of people who label themselves as interim in order to determine who is the right interim for the right assignment. So it's becoming a bit more complicated, a bit more cumbersome perhaps for that interim exec. And one of the interesting things as well is that when we look at the job market and we break it down, one of the things that we do is as a business, we do surveys. It's important to the people that we support to get a sense of what's dictating or driving the marketplace. And one of the interesting things that we found is that we just did a survey over the people on LinkedIn in the Greater London area. We can do the same surveys for other locations, Northwest Lancashire, doesn't really matter. But what we were interested in is how dynamic has the movement of people been. So in permanent search recruitment, the C-suite has historically showed between a 5 and 10% typical movement. And when there's changes at the C-suite, generally there's new strategy, there's new green lights, there's new sign-offs on significant transformation programs. So if you actually recognize from the survey that we did, and this is, to be fair, only based on LinkedIn data, only 2.7% of the C-suite local Greater London area of talent actually moved in the last 12 months against a normal backdrop of between 5 and 10% that we would expect. So what's the impact of that? The impact of that is that with fewer C-suite hires, there are theoretically fewer strategic changes, fewer strategic transformation programs. And with that, therefore, there is a lessening of volume of opportunities that are likely to be relevant to the more senior interim population. But what is interesting is that if we move down a stage in terms of the perception of level, i.e. you go into the areas of subject matter expertise, that this is the person who is great at supply chain ERP systems on an interim basis, or this is the person that's great as a chief HR officer delivering a workday HR solution. So, but when you come down to, I suppose, what we would label as the subject matter expertise, the project managers, interesting enough that has actually bucked the trend and is slightly up. And therefore, what you will tend to see, particularly through the ISPs, is actually the noise that we've seen in January and February from a lot of providers gives the perception that the market's more buoyant, is getting busier. Well, it is at a certain level. So for people who are, let's say, interim project managers and subject matter experts, I'm not saying that the acquisition of an assignment is any easier, but there is proportionately more interims of that type, but there's proportionally more available opportunity and movement as compared to those at the more executive end. So it's interesting to observe, because when it comes to the acquisition, therefore, of those opportunities, understanding this data can help you to shape and understand what your means of engagement in the market needs to be. So again, any thoughts or questions on that? Appreciated, so please offer them in the Q&A. But if we just look at somebody's journey from A to B, that journey from A to B can be summarized as really thinking about 5 core areas. So if you have these areas intact, then really what we can say is we can be, without saying the word guarantee, we can be assured of somebody's sustainability, likelihood of being able to go from one assignment opportunity to the next. And these areas, by the way, are either areas that our clients will engage on an individual basis, i.e. where they clearly recognize there's a disconnect or an opportunity to elevate, or some individuals may come to us and say, I recognise that actually there's a little bit of everything in there, and therefore they would have a tailored or bespoke service of support. So we'll talk about a couple of those in turn, just to sort of get under the bonnet and see what that means. So when we think about LinkedIn, LinkedIn is, for a lot of people that we talk to, they would say it's a necessary evil. Rather like the expression that is often given to recruitment companies, a necessary evil. But, you know, where we are with LinkedIn is that you can't really ignore it. You know, 1 billion plus profiles on there. And the interesting thing here is that when you've got many more profiles, the requirement on LinkedIn is to make yourself visible, to stand out, essentially to be able to be found by the right people for what it is that you want to be found for. Now, interestingly enough, on the point of LinkedIn, of the people that we have supported and worked with, I would say that only about 10% of those interim executives are able to be found on LinkedIn for what it is they want to be found for. And what do I mean by that expression? Well, some interims are trying to frame for the future as opposed to record where they've been. So that's why we mean for what they want to be found for. But if you don't understand the dynamics of LinkedIn beyond the superficial, i.e. post, comment, like, repost, and those things that really are just a distraction. Because actually, for those who really understand LinkedIn, what you recognize is that the algorithm is there for content. When it comes to being found, do you want to be found for your content, or do you want to be found for your expertise? Because if you want to be found for your expertise, it's not the algorithm that is important. What's actually important is understanding how the CRM system of LinkedIn is actually put together. So things like alignment of skills, alignment of industry, alignment of job titles, alignment for region are all far more important for an individual to being found than somebody saying, oh, you've got to put 3 or 4 posts out there a week and you've got to do this. And hang on a minute, I'm an interim CFO. I'm not a social media influencer. And there's a clear distinction to be had there. So whilst I'm not denigrating the value of content in the right way, there's an awful lot of misinformation, misinterpretation of where the time and the value on LinkedIn is best spent. And just to give you a very recent anecdote of a client, they came to Morphosis Partners about 3 months ago. They just did not like LinkedIn. I think they had about 80 connections on LinkedIn. By the time we did what we did, they'd only got to 100 and something, 105, 106 connections on LinkedIn. But they'd secured an opportunity. And what was interesting is that the opportunity wasn't about us clicking apply, us going to ISPs. It was through this focus of who do you want to be found by, and then effectively reverse engineering your connectivity, i.e. make yourself visible directly, that we ended up with that business directly approaching him based on the outreach that we had facilitated. So an assignment was secured that wasn't advertised in the public domain as far as we were aware, and it was a direct approach from an employer of choice who recognised that their symptom, their situation in that organisation aligned to the skill profile and the about profile and the experience profile of the individual. There was nothing about that approach that connected them because of content that was created. Content may be a value add, it helps to sort of frame an individual, but it wasn't the means by which that executive, that interim got found. So again, just be conscious and mindful that with LinkedIn, there's an awful lot of noise there. It's very easy to get distracted. And so the opportunity for you is to sort of say, well, if I am going to create content, is it for what purpose? Is it simply to be seen as visible? Or is it a bit more selfish, which is to consciously make myself more visible to those who need to know about me. And so it becomes much more structured and much more focused. So again, any questions or thoughts on LinkedIn, do feel free to throw those questions in. So the second area is clearly the recruiter channel, the intermediaries, or in the interim world, the interim service providers. Now, when they have a mandate, they are great. You know, the majority of ISPs are mandate-led, which basically means they get a brief from a company and then they have to go out and, as best they can, match to that brief. So the premise for an ISP is find somebody who fits the mandate. Now, occasionally, ISPs will get less clear mandates from companies. Essentially, well, we're not quite sure. We're in a bit of a situation we've not encountered before. So can you guide us? And so at that point, they may be much more speculative in saying, well, these are 2 or 3 individuals. And maybe in the conversations with those individuals, you'll become more clear on what it is that you actually need. But the important thing with ISPs is to recognize that the majority are mandate-led, and it's about them focusing on the time that ultimately looks to pay them. And what pays them is filling the mandate. So the question that you need to consider with your relationships with the ISPs is, A, are you with the right consultant in the right firm? And that may seem slightly odd, perhaps, but recruiters over time can sometimes move desk. They often move employer. And so the nature of how they may have been relevant to you in the past may not necessarily be the case today. So it's actually worth just reconciling and revisiting the ISPs to make sure that the reason they've not gone quiet is not simply because they no longer focus on placing interims like yourself. And actually knowing that is useful. Why? Because you're not then investing a wastage of time with individuals that don't have that reciprocal interest in you. So when it comes to ISPs, that's the first thing. The second thing you need to be aware of is the term MPC, most placeable candidate. Why is this important? Well, when you get a dynamic of more available talent competing for fewer roles, which is essentially what the LinkedIn data is inferring at the C-suite level of interims, then it means you've got to be much more precise, much more sort of valuable, in inverted commas. And the term most placeable candidate has been around for a very long time in recruitment circles, both across interim and permanent. And what that means is that it's not just about technically, are you the best of the best? Who knows until you're on assignment, because it's about how that fits the assignment as to whether you're the best or not, technically. So actually, when it comes to ISPs, it's much softer than that. It's much more malleable than that, less linear. And it's things like personality. You know, is there a relationship there? Do we get each other? You know, do I impose a sense of trust that when they call me up to interview, I will attend and not let them down? You know, things like that are biases, but they clearly help influence the advocacy to one individual over another. So the question around that is, how are you effectively maintaining your relationships with the right ISPs, as opposed to going on assignment for 12 months, suddenly appearing after 12 months and say, hello, I'm available, have you got any assignments? Oh, I've ignored you for the last 12 months. So you've just got to be very careful. To me, it's a relationship management process. And as human beings, we are all slightly biased to give more preference, more time to those that ultimately appear to have made that invested interest. And, you know, we can see where it's reciprocated. So where I'd like to go back to is I've just covered LinkedIn and the ISPs, but there are other areas here that are worth considering, such as existing networks. I'll just touch upon them, but in a less rigorous way. But existing network is just about recognizing that when it comes to assignment opportunities and acquisition, one of the key things that we found historically is that nearly 1 in 3 assignment opportunities, even for the clients that we support, ultimately come from somebody that is already in their existing network. But what we often see is that an interim will, and similarly with that particular point of contact in the network, they will ultimately recognize that, I knew you as a commercial director on a permanent basis. 10 years later, you reach out to that person who may be a CEO, let's say, and say, I'm an interim expert. I support transformation in FMCG. Have you got any assignments? The bit that's missing in that sort of anecdote or example is repositioning, because people generally put people in a box based on their first experience. So one of the things you need to think about with your existing network is, rather than just reach out and say, hello, heads above the parapet now, I'm looking for an assignment opportunity, can you help? You've really got to consider first and take that step back, which is, for the person I'm looking to reach out to who may be able to help me, how do they remember me? What was my experience? And if that experience and memory doesn't look like how you wish to be seen today, then actually you can't just reach out to and say, have you got any assignments or whatever? It just won't land, it won't resonate, they won't connect with that. So you've got to do this realignment piece first, which is essentially show interest in them, let them reciprocate, so that you're both brought up to your present state. And then based on that exchange, you're going to be in a far stronger position, as are they in your existing network, to understand their relative value and merit to you in terms of what it is that you're expecting to achieve. The next area we talk about is an ability to go direct. We had a Morphosis client who 2 weeks ago was directly approached by an employer that we had targeted. We'd made them visible to them. And the company literally just came direct. It was actually from the PA to the chairman and basically said, where's the effect of, you got an interesting profile, can we connect? But it requires a methodology and it requires a focus to be able to do that. So for anybody looking to go direct to employers and to manage their own business development piece to a larger extent themselves in combination with ISPs, you can't start with, I think I can do lots of different things, because the challenge you'll have then is, how do you translate that to a focus group of potential organizations? So you actually need to start off with you. And the idea is rather than the recruiter route, which is trying to fit a mandate, you actually start off with you and say, well, what is the best optimum version of me? What does that look like? Okay, so it looks like transformation, Greater London area for my convenience, I don't know, £1,200 a day, financial services, great, very clear, very robust. Oh, what's my niche expertise? I don't know, delivering IA agents, who knows? Agentic AI, ERP systems, could be anything, but what it is an expertise that you have that somebody like me or another wouldn't have. And so that helps to differentiate. And that then enables you to curate a focused choice of organizations. And at that point, it becomes something that's manageable, because if you're clearly self-aware and very focused on what it is that you want to expend your time and energy on, well, having the clarity of that and therefore the confidence of that and the conviction of that, you can see how that will manifest to those that you come to engage with. You know, a chairman doesn't want to hire an interim for what they would like to do. A chairman wants to hire the interim because of what they can effectively back themselves to be able to execute. So backing your own capabilities will enable you to create a much more focused way of managing that direct approach to organizations. And then the final thing, which a lot of our clients generally don't like to talk about, is the actual ability to win the selection process. Because one of the things that a lot of interims are talking about now, and indeed frustratingly ISPs are talking about now, is the fact that selection processes for interim assignment opportunities are becoming, in a lot of cases, more protracted, more long-winded. Often they have the feel and look of a permanent recruitment process. But this is a business-to-business transaction. So again, are you actually following the route, the roadmap for success, when ultimately that roadmap looks like a permanent hiring process? But if it does, what that then does is it puts an added pressure on you to essentially compete at interview. And, I remember interim recruitment a few years ago where you could literally talk to a company, they would share their problem with you. You'd say, I've got just the person for you. You introduce that one person, they like that person, hopefully, and the appointment is made. Now it's, well, you're one of 6. Okay. 4 get to first interview. We can't make a mind up yet. So 4 will get to second interview. You still can't make your mind up. So there's a presentation, and then that comes to 2. And that's not helpful to interims. It's actually not helpful to the end company either, because ultimately that fuels a growing disconnect between, does a client really know what they want? Are they just prying for free consultancy? Or is there a genuine commitment to the hiring need? So the competence to win at selection, when you've got more people competing for fewer roles, and you've got a slight inferred arrogance, I would say, in the job market, which is we perceive there's more choice, so therefore we can appear to be more selective. And the problem with that is that often those companies don't really know what they want, because if they did, they wouldn't probably have the problem in the first place. So the question then becomes is, how can you take this permanent recruitment process that is being enforced more and more and actually translate it into a B2B business-like framed conversation? And what's quite interesting with the interims that we take through that particular process is that their ability to do that in these tougher markets is not as strong or as sharp as it could be. So these are the areas that through our own experience we come to recognize as being not necessarily the challenge areas for interims, but the opportunity areas to look at where they are, benchmark themselves, and either it's fine, nothing to do, carry on, or actually the reason that I'm not quite having the success that I would like is down to the fact that certain aspects have moved on, I'm no longer aligned in an optimum way, and therefore that is where the inherent risk is coming from. So I just thought I'd touch upon those other things just for your own awareness. And so hopefully that sort of gives you some real insight here. And I'm obviously quite keen to flag up and deal with any questions or insights that, the people that are on this webinar are experiencing or that have experienced, because I believe those questions will be of value to us all. So over to you, Charles, if there are any questions that we can.
Thanks, Simon. So there's a few questions coming in and 1 or 2 comments. So I'll just run down them. So from Sean, yes, it does resonate. I was an interim 10 years ago and the phone kept ringing from the agencies. Now there is silence. I think, yeah, that's pretty much as you suggested. So from Peter Cooper, as previous interim, how best could I get an interim assignment now, quickly? My own business has a slim pipeline right now.
Wow. Okay. I love these really easy first questions. Thank you, Charles. And thank you to. I think it's a very interesting one, because what I would say is if we were talking 2 or 3 weeks ago, I'd have said to you the quickest route to an assignment opportunity would have been to recognize the right consultants in the right ISPs and really make yourself as visible to them as you can, because their behavior coming straight back into a new calendar year is catch up with candidates, catch up with clients. And what they hope for is that they'll get a flurry of clients who perhaps abstained or procrastinated ahead of the festive break, who suddenly say, yes, you were right. This is now really a pain for us. Can you find us somebody as of 3 weeks ago. And then, of course, we know that that's not ideal because it puts everybody into a frenetic pace. But often a lot of mandates with ISPs do come that way. However, we're now talking middle February, and a lot of those ISPs have done I guess, what I would call the ring round in terms of candidates and clients. So they are now what I would call back to their usual routine in terms of ebb and flow. I know this because I used to be one myself for about 10 years. So what I would be advocating now is the first thing I would say is, what is it that you are as an interim? So let's say, for example, that you are an interim chief transformation officer, financial services, and there seems to be a bit of a running theme that you're quite good in fintechs. So that for me is gold dust when it comes to having focus, because clearly that's where the market is recognizing where your value is. And it's the market that determines your success. So from that perspective, I would be looking at what your transformation expertise is in this example. So let's say it's inputting processes and systems in place that enable a smaller business to actually become a bigger business and to succeed in that way. So what I'd be suggesting to you is look for businesses, the fintechs that are announcing triggers or symptoms or situations like that. And then from my perspective, I would be saying to you, well, okay, so identify the person who's responsible for executing whatever that is. So it could be a chairman, it could be an investor, it could be a combination. Those are the people to try and make yourself visible to. And certainly from my experience as a former headhunter and recruiter, I didn't chase other recruiters' vacancies to build a desk. I actually let the others do that. And I actually looked at triggers and business news announcements, because that is when you have the opportunity to be at the earliest stage of a discussion with a business. And from an interim perspective, that is the best situation you can be in, because you become from the outset part of the conversation. And when it comes to giving them clarity, if they then say, well, we're a PLC, we need to benchmark, we need to be seen to be meeting 2 or 3 other individuals. If you're in the early discussion, you've essentially been able to frame the job spec with you in mind. That makes it almost impossible for a shortlisted candidate that's being benchmarked against you to be able to compete to win. So certainly now, February, certainly what we're doing with our clients is its direct approach in the main. It was the ISPs in January, it's direct approach now. So hopefully that gives you some insight.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Peter has another one. So, do most ISP and clients use AI to match their opportunity to our profile content? Yeah, this could take a while.
No, the short answer is that tools have been utilised for a number of years in recruitment, whether it be Brass Ring, Talio, if I go back to the early 2010s, and prior. And they were essentially CRM systems with filtering tools and parameters. AI is just, dare I say it, an upgraded version of that. And so, but the point of filters have been there for some time. And I would say to you that if your sense of AI being used by recruiters is based on a growing sense of silence from recruiters, or a growing lack of disengagement with the recruiters, I would actually say it's less likely to be because of AI and more likely to be what I alluded to at the head of the webinar, which is there is a surplus relative to the volume of mandates being given to ISPs at the moment of talent. And if you go back a few years, certainly the ISP interims that I know, the recruiters, they would say, yeah, I've got this mandate, I've got 2 or 3 great guys and girls for it, that's who I'm putting forward. And it was very orderly and very easily. In fact, a lot of recruiters better understood who their good candidates were, which is why historically a lot of interim recruiters would repeat place the same people. I used to do it. Whereas now I think what's happening is that the recruiters are simply being overrun, not just with purist interims, but to quote the chairman of the IIM's phrase, I'm not sure who else uses it, I'm sure many have adopted it now, but the in-betweeners, those who are being displaced from permanent roles, don't get traction quickly. I know what I can do. I'll suddenly relabel myself as an interim until I get the next permanent job. You put that volume, that swell into the job market, and the average recruiter and recruitment firm is not that greatly automated. Yes, they've got a CRM system and things like that. But if you've got 100 candidates a week knocking on your door to say, I'm brilliant, please talk to me, and they've got 5 mandates to try and fill, each with 5 or 6 candidates to, align for that and to filter for that, you can see how quickly that recruiter starts to run out of time. And that's the biggest issue for a lot of interim recruiters rather than AI. The time where I would say to you, be worried about AI is when you see anything that says click apply. That's when you know you've got a level of intermediary in place. And my advice to people is do not click apply. There are other things that you can do that are benefiting. So again, thank you for the question, and hopefully that question will resonate with other people on the webinar as well.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Excuse me, it's a slightly lengthy one here, so I'll go slowly. From Nick, my question is more about how to land your first formally interim assignment. I've worked for more than 10 years at Big Four consultancy, leadership and delivery, which has been very much the same as interim and some interim leadership before that. Currently, I'm fractional with a number of small clients, but I want actual interim, full-time, fixed-term or fixed-ish work. What are the key factors to being credible enough to ISPs, direct clients, and my network? Yeah, it's a lot to digest.
Well, no, and a great question, and I would suspect probably not the only person on this webinar to have that thought. So the short answer is this, is that when we think about routes to opportunities, there are essentially 3 routes. The first route is those who have a mandate, so it's a company in panic, they need a solution, they go to recruiters, ISPs, and the ISPs, of course, then work with urgency. The issue with that is that the whole nature of the interim ISP engagement is we need somebody who you can land today, tomorrow, next week, who looks like they've done it 3 or 4 times already and can deliver it within the timetable of what is interim. So I'm not saying that that precludes you from being able to acquire your first assignment through an ISP. There's always lady luck. And I don't mean to sound facetious on that, but the point is when you look at the commercial model of how an ISP operates, it's not just your day rate, it's then the ISP's uplift. And if you're the buyer in a marketplace where they perceive there is volume of choice, then you can see how you're likely to get precluded through those filters. The good news is there are another 2 routes. The second route is the existing network that I talked about before. And the majority of interims that we work with who are, like yourself, looking to break into bona fide interim in the right way and land that credible interim assignment, we tend to navigate them to the right people through their existing network as a channel. But the key requirement there, which goes back to something I said earlier, is the notion of repositioning. Because if you've got that permanent career, the credibility that has essentially created the network that you have, and let's say they know who's a partner of a Big Four firm, they will see you as a, wow, you would have worked with, I don't know, however many clients and such a big team. Everything is, major multinational. So it could be a 2-year project here, 5-year here, whatever it may be. It doesn't look like 3 months, high impact short-term intervention, or 6 months, or whatever. So if you're going to go your existing network, you've got to consider what your proposition is and how you can reframe your historic story to that to support a future narrative. Once you've done that, you then identify the right people in your network who are able to give you visibility to those ecosystems or audiences. And the third route is direct approach. Now, direct approach, if you think about organizations and you think about their buying behaviors, large firms will often put a very, very experienced interim as a preferred option to maybe a larger consultancy. In fact, often interims will go in on the back of a larger strategy consultancy firm being in a business, because at that point there are clear requirements in terms of subject matter expertise. But if you go down the tiers of the advisors, and the same with the corporate businesses that you look for, you get down into the SME marketplace, and they're far less likely to be thinking, we have a problem, we need McKinsey. They're going to go, we have a problem, we can't afford McKinsey, but we still have the problem that needs a solution. So thinking about who you would look to target could certainly help in that process. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a steer.
Thank you again, Simon. One from Sean. What are the best sources to research the issues organisations are facing?
Wow. Okay. Right. So it depends how deep your pockets are, really. Although I would say that AI can be quite useful. So, and even those now, to get the useful variations of them, you're having to sort of invest a level of investment in them. But the short answer for me is this, is that when I was recruiting some years ago in London, I used to get City AM every morning. I'd pick it up, that freebie little, and for me it was great because it was small snippets. BAE Systems have just landed a 9 billion contract. Oh, that's a lead. Really? How does that figure as in the brain of a recruiter? Well, they're going to have to execute on it and deliver on it. So what does that mean in terms of resource planning? A company's announced profit warnings. A company's announced a divestment program. A company's announced a carve out. So for me, the best insights are before you go looking at all of that noise, to start with yourself and say, well, what kind of noise does my capabilities and skill set tend to lend itself to? So again, if we go back to the sort of, transformation person in fintech, have a think. So when I've been engaged in the past, what has been the trigger that's generally led to my requirement and my appointment? It's the fact that, I don't know, they're a founder-based team and suddenly they recognize they need full-time credibility and they need somebody to set the infrastructure up and to put the systems in place. Right. So that's the kind of intelligence then that you look for. And AI can help you with that. Because I'd be putting out triggers out there that sort of say, can you highlight which fintech organizations have recently announced X, Y, or Z? And then that becomes an ecosystem or an audience that you can start to focus your message towards. Because when it's noisy with lots of choice and lots of talent and lots of options, the people who tend to win are the ones who offer most clarity. And that really is framed around conviction and confidence around what it is that you want to do and what it is that you're capable of doing. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. At the moment, that is all our questions. I've just prodded everybody a little bit. So, Simon, any more you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, look, just whilst the final questions are coming through, it's probably just worth sharing that, look, from our point of view, is there anything that we could do if any of this resonates? So I'll just sort of make you aware that in combination with the IIM, we do support the members of the IIM through the services that we provide. Now, these services are optional. At the end of the day, we operate with integrity. And what that means in practice is that if you recognize that there is a disconnect or an opportunity to benchmark around, let's say, one of the areas that have been highlighted today, or maybe you don't recognize any of the areas and would simply like a conversation to explore it. Well, you know, both myself and the co-founder Joe Rawcliffe are both available to speak to you. We're more than happy to connect and exchange messages if any of this resonates. But for those where it makes sense, then the areas that we highlighted in this webinar, we refer to as chalk points or derailers. And each one comes in its own high impact workshop series. And the reason we deliver it that way is that some people recognize that the LinkedIn is the disconnect, or the ISPs is a disconnect, or going direct. So we absolutely hone in and focus on that area. But if you're an IIM member, we will offer you the series with a 50% discount, which is quite significant for Q1, you know, in order to help people to really make the best of the available noise that's in the job market today. If you're not currently an IIM member, then you have two options. One is that you can still have a discount or a concession. But what I would also suggest is that, and I can see my typo there of 2025, so apologies. I think it is Friday the 27th, however. I think that bit's accurate. But the 25% is still available to you. Or I would encourage those who are curious about the Institute of Interim Management to reach out, as Charles discussed and highlighted ahead of this discussion or webinar, because ultimately, if you are relevant to the Institute and vice versa, then again, we've given you enough time here till the end of March, essentially, you know, to take advantage of a 50% discount rather than a 25% discount if it's of interest to you. That's purely for the choke point workshop. So whether it be LinkedIn, ISPs, going direct, or combination, you can mix and match, but that is where the value is. So, you know, if you want to be top of your game for the year ahead, I'm pretty sure you will get some value from it relative to the investment level. So that's it really, Charles, unless there's any other questions.
No other questions. So very last chance for those who are still on the call, pop them in now. I'll wait a minute while some just goes through, but no, nothing coming through. So with that, I think we will wrap up. So thank you very much to Simon, particularly from his recent, hang on, very helpful. So thank you as well. So I'll wrap up the session now. As I mentioned earlier, it's being recorded. It will be shared with you, and as will the various offers and things as well, to just that you think about. With that, we'll finish a few minutes early. Thank you everybody for joining today. Have a good, wonderful rest of the afternoon and the day, and we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully.
Well, thank you all for attending, and I hope everybody here today was able to at least gain something from the information that was shared.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.